Cool.
So welcome to this now fourth interview of the One Life Presenter Online Summit. And we're here with Matt Cubbler, who is he's a law enforcement professional. You say it so plainly. He said he's a cop, right? And so I think that's just that's probably you're very much in that world on a day-to-day basis, but also a speaker and a podcast host. I believe there was a book that was written, right? Book out as well, and so has kind of taken on this shield, and we're going to get into his story in a little bit, but kind of found a new purpose after going through some extreme challenges, and is helping lots of people in a variety of different ways really figure out what they're doing with their life. And so I thought that it would be a great opportunity to chat. So thanks, Matt, for hanging out with us and spending some time.
No, I'm excited, man. I'm looking forward to October, but this is a really cool way to sort of stick my toe in the water in the One Life world and figure out how I'm going to deliver this in October and just getting to know the people involved with the program. And I'm just excited, and thanks.
Yeah. I know we got a chance to speak before kind of a pre-call, but for those of you guys who are new to the One Life community, our core values are vision planning, relationships, finances, and wellness. And we find that people are always looking to get better. At least the people in our community are always looking to grow in those areas. And our mission as an organization is to move people along this path from surviving to thriving. And what I've found in talking with Jesse, kind of making me realize that a lot of people are in that place where they don't have a purpose and they don't have that thing that's driving them. And that's what kind of leads them to make these decisions, whether it's addiction or gangs or whatever it may be, that takes them off of this path. But I think it ultimately comes down to not having a vision. And so I'd love for you to share, Matt, your journey. People might see you today and where you are and go, man, this guy's an author, he's a speaker, he's got a podcast, he's got a family, he's got a full-time job, this guy has it all together. And they might have think that it was always that way, but I know that's not the case. So I'd love for you to kind of take us through, those periods that made a big difference in your life and how you got to this place today.
Well, first of all, I'm far from a finished product, and I'm far from having it together. But what I do have is an understanding of who I am, and I think that's once you have that, you can sort of have a vision for just about anything. If you know what your strengths and weaknesses are and who you are as a person, that's kind of where I'm at today. So it allows me to be able to try a bunch of different things and do a bunch of different things and hopefully do them well. But I'm 48. I got, a lot of life in me, and I've lived a long and very diverse life. And I've been blessed to have to live the life that I live. And I've had tragedy and I've had trauma but all those things ultimately are what get you to who you are today. There's nothing about me that wouldn't be me if I didn't go through those things. I grew up outside Philadelphia in an urban town called Pottstown, and my mom, Louise, is an amazing human being. She's the hardest working woman I've ever met in my entire life, and she raised me and my brother Andy on her own for the first 12 years of my life. And she worked 3 jobs and just taught me what hard work was all about. And my brother Andy he was autistic by today's standards. Back then he was just considered mentally retarded in the 1970s. And there wasn't an autism, at least it wasn't an identified issue like it is today. And growing up with a brother who had autism who also had a severe stutter. And if you can imagine the worst stutter you've ever heard in your life, and multiply that by 100, my brother's face would contort, his eyes would roll into his head. It was a pretty awkward thing to be around, but 100 times worse to actually have it happen to you. So he didn't necessarily have a whole lot of friends, and we lived growing up in a lot of low income areas, and living in those environments didn't necessarily lend to having a lot of positive childhood engagements. And so I spent most of my youth just protecting my brother. Even though he was 3 years older, almost 3 years older, he was still the younger brother by proxy. And I can remember from the time I was like 6 or 7 that the roles kind of switched, and I became the older brother. And that continued on through all my life until I was 18. And unfortunately, July 12th, 1989, my brother was killed in a car accident. And other people have had loss in their life. Other people have had people die and trauma. And for me, this was just one that, in my life, I would have never expected my brother to die. Like, I to this day still think that my brother should be living with me right now, downstairs, hanging out with my dog. And that's just the way life was supposed to be. I was going to always take care of him. And that's not the case. And a month after my brother died, I went in the Army. So I never really had a moment to where I could channel that and try to deal with the loss and the pain that I was going through. And I pretty much just tamped it down and put it in a spot in my heart that unfortunately grew into a callus around my heart. And for 13 years, I was incapable of loving, expressing it. I was incapable of receiving love. I was incapable of feeling joy. And if you think about the first 13 years after my brother died, I was 18 till I was 31 years old. And a lot of things happened during that time. I got married. I went in the military, did great in the military, but I didn't feel anything. I didn't connect with other people. Met the woman of my dreams, married her. And the hardest thing to say is that I didn't really know how to love my wife. And I certainly didn't know how to receive love from her. Shortly after we got married, we got pregnant. Had my daughter, Rebecca. Same thing. I knew my responsibilities. I knew what I had to do as a father, but I didn't know how to love her. I didn't know how to give her my heart. And I certainly didn't know how to feel that back. And it wasn't until 2002, when my son was born, my son Andrew, who I named after my brother Andy, that I finally had the ability to forgive and to heal. And it came from a moment of God's grace. And whether you believe in God or not, I do. And I believe that everything in your life has a purpose and a reason. And for whatever reason, my grandmother waited 13 years to give me this gift, which was my brother's clothes made into a quilt. The week my brother died, he was staying with my grandmother because my mother and stepfather were on vacation. And for whatever reason, she kept his clothes in storage for 13 years. She didn't give me the quilt when my daughter was born, but she gave it to me when my son was born. And I don't know if it's because it was a boy and I was having a son and I was naming him after my brother. I don't know, and I really don't care. I just know that the quilt that she gave me was literally the single greatest gift I've ever received in my life, because it allowed me to have a piece of my brother that I didn't have for 13 years. I was able to hold him, and having that feeling of him close to me just sort of opened up this floodgate of emotions. And that night I went down to my basement office and I spent the better part of 8 or 9 hours writing very vivid and clear memories about my brother. And it flowed. It just kept flowing. And it was, when I was done, I came upstairs the next morning and I'd written 26,000 words of memories. And that's a lot of writing. And anybody's ever written, 26,000 words is about 70 pages of a standard book. It was intense, and I cried a lot, and I released a lot of anger and a lot of guilt. And I came up that next morning and I felt like a weight had been lifted off of me. And I tell this story a lot, but it was like 7:30 in the morning when I came up, and the sun was the our back window in the kitchen, where directly across from the stairs to my basement, the sun would come up and would come through that window. And I never really noticed it, never paid attention to it. And that day I noticed it, and I noticed the clarity of the colors in the light coming through that window. And I just remember thinking to myself, why haven't I seen that? And the reality is, for 13 years, I wasn't seeing anything. I was feeling nothing. And the fact that I could see that was kind of like this switch had switched. And I spent the next 3 years finishing what turned out to become the book that I wrote about my brother, called A Brother's Love, a Memoir. And there's 26,000 words were the basis of that. That was the beginning of that book. So for me, that process of writing my life story and my brother's life story was my healing period, the coming to terms with what had happened that I hadn't done in a long time. And it allowed me to feel again, allowed me to love again, and allowed me to be a better husband and father and friend and cop. And that sort of started this ball rolling, which has taken me to where I am today. And, from writing a book, I wrote the book not because I wanted to be a speaker. I wrote the book to heal. when I wrote the books, I wanted to have some sort of like a place where my kids could go and my wife could go and people that never met my brother could go to learn and to experience my brother and know him. And he could have new friends and people could love him like I did through my eyes. And I think that's what that book was. And it opened up what I had not been paying attention to, what I had not even thought of, is that when my brother died, I lost my purpose. I was his protector. And I spent the next 13 years joining the military, fighting in the war, becoming a cop, being a SWAT cop, becoming an air marshal. I mean, all these things that I did during that 13-year period was trying to fill a void that was lost when my brother died. And writing that book created a new purpose for me. And it allowed me to share my brother in a way that I wasn't able to do prior when he was alive. And certainly not, I never dealt with it during those 13 years. So now I had this purpose where I could share my brother and his amazing life with other people. And that just kind of just took me to where I am today. And as a speaker, as a podcast host, as an entrepreneur, I own a company that manufactures a piece of patented equipment that we own. And I help people with neuromuscular and neurological disease and injury. That's what I've been doing all day today. Took an hour off to do this, and I got to go back and work with my stroke clients. And, it's built this passion and purpose inside of me, just simply healing my heart, that allowed me to see my abilities and my strengths and the things that I had passion for. And I can see now opportunities that I didn't have before. But they were probably there. Don't get me wrong. I just didn't see them. And I wrote in the book, and I still think it's one of the best things I've ever written, where I said, now I know that there's these doors that are opening, and there's, without a doubt, my brother's handprint is on those doorknobs, helping me go through those doors so that I can experience what life's supposed to be giving me. And so that's me. That's who I am.
I want to thank you for sharing that, because it's there's so much value in there. And I think especially for men, I don't know if you followed you have a Jim Thome jersey behind you. And so the recent death in the MLB, the pitcher for the Angels. So I actually played Little League with him. He's ironically on that. I still keep that picture because it was the best baseball team I've ever been. I didn't play college or anything like that, but Little League, we played with him, and I played like Little League with him. And, even then we knew that he had a real talent. And so it was an unfortunate week, going through that. And my point in saying that is that there is so much that needs to happen for someone to kind of get past that I don't think, frankly, a lot of guys give themselves space for, to grieve. You mentioned that you kept kind of putting off that grieving process throughout your life. And I think that's, I just want to get your thoughts on, coming from the law enforcement world, having a military background, being very much this guy's guy, and then having a book about this, I'd imagine that there is some conflict or I'm just kind of curious what that experience has been with you, and if you see those worlds opening up to the value of giving yourself space, or the value of kind of mental and emotional health, or just kind of what that's been like, coming from your particular perspective.
It's a misnomer. I think, we put up this facade as police officers, and military guys, and that we're hard charging badasses, and we don't get impacted by the things that we see or have to do in our lives in those roles. And the reality is, the guys that I've served with and the officers that I've worked with, we've lost guys, experienced trauma. We've experienced some really messed up crime scenes, and seen some things that you should never, ever see in your lifetime. And people think that we just aren't impacted by that. But I'll be honest with you, every cop that I've ever worked with, if you go to a police funeral, you're going to see hundreds of police officers, men, tough guys, bawling their eyes out. You're going to see, I think the guys that I've worked with and served with will say, I love you faster than normal people will. And I think it's this feeling of I don't know if it's the camaraderie, or if it's this common bond that unites us, that we've all seen too much shit, that it's not meant for the brain to handle. And we acknowledge that in each other. I think that's important. But cops, servicemen, soldiers, Marines, whoever, they feel and they hurt and they grieve and they share amongst the people they trust. And you and I have talked about this. I have a very narrow trust circle, just because of the life I've lived and the things I've seen. And it's hard for me to just openly trust people who may be trustworthy. I don't have that. But amongst the people that I find that common bond with, it's so much easier to express those emotions and express what you're feeling in that same circle of trust. And I think that's where the image of not having emotions or being robots or being unaffected comes from, because we don't have the trust value to share that with you yet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And I'm curious about the tools, and I'd love to, if you had an idea or kind of a checklist of what people would maybe come away from, your presentation at One Life. I'm wondering if there are tactics or strategies or if it's inspiration or perspective or what are the things that people kind of, what can they take away from you and your brother's story that can help them grow in these areas that I mentioned, at the beginning of the talk?
I think the thing that I've found from this is from feedback from other people. And when I started speaking, like I said, my next book I'm writing is called The Accidental Speaker, because I'll be honest with you, I didn't want to be a speaker. It wasn't something I had planned on. It wasn't even a thought in my head. It just sort of happened. And I think the reason why I titled it The Accidental Speaker is because I'm not trying to be a speaker. I'm just sharing something that's very true and real to me in a way that is literally, I'm able to feel the emotions of when it happened, when I'm telling different parts of my life. At that moment, I'm sharing it. And I think what people have found the most value out of what I do is that I'm real. I share deep emotion openly, and everyone has, I don't know of any person outside of a younger person who has never experienced loss or death or struggle or trauma or sadness or depression or whatever. And my story has all of that. And right now I'm in a really good period, and I can show how I went from who I was before my brother died, who I was for the 13 years after he died, and who I was since 2002. And I can put together the story that shows that it's not a bunch of moments individually that happened to me, and I just happened to get to where I am because of luck. It's about the journey. It's about the dash. It's about, where my podcast is called Two Dates and a Dash, and the day you're born and the day you die are the two dates, and the dash is what you do in between. And I would even go a step farther and to say that the dash is what keeps your name spoken after that second date. It keeps your name relevant. It keeps the memories and the thoughts and the feelings and the love and the admiration in the hearts and minds of people that knew you. And the minute I was able to regain my purpose and identify what I'm supposed to be doing with this stage of my life, I realized that it was no different than what I'd been doing, except I've now had a real name for it and an identity to it and an ability to be hyper sensitive to all my emotions. And it's sometimes a curse and sometimes a gift. But if I can share who I am and what I've seen and what I've done with a group of people who don't know me, and when they're done, they know me, they know my brother, they know my purpose, and they know why I do all these things. And it should be, in my opinion, what everybody should be living for, which is when you have that last date happen in your life, you want to make sure that your name is never not uttered. You want to make sure that your impact on this world, whether it was 21 years like my brother, or you lived to be 100, that during that dash, you lived such a meaningful, selfless, servant-driven life that you are worthy of being remembered. And that's what my entire life, it's not a training seminar. I'm not teaching a subject. I'm sharing a piece of my heart and explaining to people why I do what I do. And hopefully when what they take away from that is an understanding of where that could fit into their life and where maybe they are struggling or they're treading water and they're not really propelling themselves forward, and how maybe through things that had happened to me and how I overcame them, I can inspire them to figure out how to do that. Or maybe, they can reach out and we can have a conference call and just talk and figure things out. I think that's what the connectivity component of life is, what's missing. And people aren't willing to be open and honest for fear of that's somehow going to come and bite them in the ass. And then the reality is that from what I've found, at least in my perspective, is the more open and honest I am, and the more I am transparent in all aspects of my life, that consistent effort, that consistent messaging, that consistent way that I live my life is what ultimately is creating these opportunities for me.
Well, I want to commend and appreciate you for that, because I know that when we recently had a challenging time with our family, that the thing that was pushing me through was not trainings or step-by-steps or do this or do that. It was stories and people of who had experienced things, and that's what pulled me through. So I it's happening now, and I just appreciate you taking up that shield for those who need those stories, because I didn't realize that that's what I needed. It wasn't a conscious thing. I was it's kind of, instead of comfort food, it was comfort stories, and that made things all the better. So I just want to thank you for that. Matt, you have quite a few things going on. What I love is you find a way and find the time to make all these things happen. And, you're kind of walking the talk of being a servant leader. You mentioned there's a podcast. The book, I would imagine, is available on Amazon. Yep, those places. Great. And the name of the podcast is 2 Dates and a Dash, correct?
Yep.
Cool. And what are kind of, you bring on quite a few, the guests that are on that podcast have a wide range. So what's kind of the thread that brings all the people together, you think?
Well, one, I was a bodyguard for 20 plus years for athletes and celebrities. And so I got to know a lot of people. And I've never asked for a favor in my life. So some of the bigger name people that have been on and the more celebrity types were through favors that I was cashing in on to make sure that I at least had some substance as far as the wow factor to the show. But to be honest with you, as much as I love Curt Schilling's interview or Mickey Ward or Vince Papale or any of those guys, it's the Dawn Sweeters who lost their daughter to an opioid crisis, or the guy I had last night, Charlie Mitchell, who lost a son to suicide after being bullied when he was 14 years old. Those types of stories are the ones that can heal hearts and can give people hope. And ultimately, I talked to Curt Schilling for an hour. We spent about 4 minutes talking about baseball. And that wasn't by design. I have one question when I ask it, who is whatever the guest's name is. And however they answer that question is kind of how the show goes. And I chose that route because as a cop, as an investigator, I don't know who did it. And I have to figure out who did. And I ask one general question to start, and then everything sort of comes off the answers. And that's kind of how I've always done things. And it would be stupid for me to try to imitate someone else or come up with a new way to conduct an interview. So I just decided to stick with what works. But for me, the thing that the show is designed for, what I wanted this show to be about, was simply people who have lived and sharing their life, whether it's triumphant or that they've lost, or ultimately, I just want people to see real people having conversations that are important to them. And that's what's been fun about it is some of the people I've asked to come on, some people have asked to come on, and every one of them, maybe a handful, 3 or 4 that were kind of whatevers. But I guess out of 48 shows, I can have a handful of duds. But ultimately, I don't want to do a business show. I don't want to do your typical entrepreneurial type show. If you're an entrepreneur, you better have something of substance. You better let me see you as who you are, or else it's not going to happen. And because I think the world needs to see more realness. And we live in a world of wag the dog, and where depending on the channel you're watching will dictate what story you're being told. And somewhere behind all of that on either side is the truth and the realness. And that's what I really just want to be real in every aspect of my life. And it would be stupid not to do it on the show.
Yeah. Well, you've done just that. And I appreciate the authenticity and the realness that you bring, because I think you're right. It's much needed it's just much needed in this world. So guys, I would encourage you guys to get registered if you're not already for the One Life conference. It's scheduled to be the best one yet. I mean, I look at the lineup and it is just, we had two amazing people on today, and it's just heavy hitter after heavy hitter after value after value. So you're going to be just surrounded by a group of people who really are and can transform your life. And so I'm excited. Thanks for hanging out with us today, Matt, and the rest of you guys come hang out with us in Long Beach this October.